All right, welcome everyone. We're about to get started. A little bit of housekeeping before I pass it, this disembodied head passes it over to our moderator and our panelists. You can ask questions of the panelists just by clicking into your chat. We won't respond to questions until the very end, but you're welcome to post throughout the conversation. And with that, Sakita, I will pass it to you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Sarah. Good morning, good afternoon. It's an honor to be here today. So I'm Sakita Grant. I'm your moderator for this hour. I'm also the VP of Programs for the Solutions Project. We're going to have a lot of fun with an outstanding panel, bringing us a lot of incredible insights around climate justice and environmental justice work, how that interacts with the corporate sector and what this all means for Climate Week, what this moment means and what we should be looking forward to, especially in New York. So the Solutions Project, a little context, we operate at the juncture of philanthropy and climate justice movement. We're now making more than $10 million in grants every year to grassroots organizations led mostly by women of color. We also help amplify their climate innovations through media, narrative, and other communication strategies that influences large-scale policy across the US, including tribal nations and Puerto Rico. The Solutions Project is the environmental justice partner of Climate Week New York, and we are so excited that we've been able to support and match UPROSE, who we have representation here today, with the opportunity to have their incredible intergenerational leadership featured on the Getting It Done ad campaign. And so if we're able to, I think we might try to share some images from that ad campaign. Beautiful cover shot. Oh, this is the first time I'm seeing this. I love this powerful, this is how we know it's gonna be all right, this picture right here. And Solutions Project has also had the opportunity of supporting and organizing 3 events that feature innovations from our frontline partners, this being one of them, and we're so excited you can join us. So for the Solutions Project, we've funded and had the honor of being able to partner with and fund 3 of our panelists that are joining us today: Push Buffalo, Align New York, and UPROSE, but since 2015. We're also excited to support their leadership in the formation of the New York Renews Coalition, which you'll hear a lot about. If you don't know, you're gonna know today, and you're gonna wanna learn more and continue to support and invest where you can. This coalition, this formation, has the vision that frontline leaders here could build power to push the state of New York to pursue climate justice policy, including 100% renewable energy. So as you'll hear from our panelists, our partners and the New York Renews Coalition as leaders went on to win what Vox called the strongest climate policy in the country, which I'm sneaking in here as a California girl who worked on Cali policies. I love to hear this because New York is really setting a bar across the nation and even the world. It's what the Biden-Harris administration credits as an inspiration for the Federal Justice 40 initiative that was announced earlier this year. So without further delay, I'm honored to introduce these long-term frontline and corporate partners of the Solutions Project. So I'm going to start with Rahwa Gurmatzian, who leads Push Buffalo, a multi-strategy grassroots organization in Buffalo, New York, that mobilizes residents to create strong neighborhoods with quality, affordable housing, to expand local hiring opportunities, and to advance economic and environmental justice in Buffalo. And as a co-founding steering committee member of New York Renews, Rahwa brings that vision and impact to New York State and beyond. And we'll hear more about that. We also have joining us Kate Ogden, who leads the advocacy and movement partnerships with 7th Generation, a Unilever company. Seventh Generation has been a business supporter of New York Renews since 2018, and now also supports the climate justice campaigns and Indigenous water protectors throughout the country. Thank you so much for that work. We're also honored to have with us Maritza Silva Farrell, who leads Align New York, and has this mission, this powerful mission again of creating jobs, vibrant communities, and accountable democracy for all New Yorkers. She is also a co-founding steering committee member of New York Renews. And we have the incredible Elizabeth Jean-Pierre, who leads UPROSE, which we heard earlier about, and we saw your picture on the magazine cover, an intergenerational, multiracial, nationally recognized community organization that promotes sustainability and resilience in Brooklyn Sunset Park. And through her co-founding steering committee membership in both New York Renews and as co-chair of the Climate Justice Alliance, brings her expertise to New York State as well as national campaigns. That just gave me so much energy just reading all of that and knowing that we get to be here together. So let's dive into the questions. The first question, so I can be talking less, the first question is for everyone. So, you know, we'll start with that. What motivated your organization to join forces across the New York Renews Coalition? And what became possible through this collective formation that wasn't possibly before? We talk a lot about the need in the power of the collective in movement organizing. So would love to hear about that. And maybe Maritza, should we start with you?
Sure, thank you, Sakita. I mean, I love talking about New York Renews, and I could talk about it for a real long time, but I want to keep it short. And I'll say this. Align is an organization that traditionally builds coalitions with labor unions, environmental justice groups, grassroots groups, specifically to identify the commonalities among different sectors and different interests on how do we get actually in alignment, as the name is, Align. So when New York Renews was formed, my predecessor actually met with so many great folks from the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance, Push Buffalo, Working Families, and this was right after the climate mobilization that we have in September. Yesterday was 7 years since that happened. If you all remember, right, we have this amazing People's Climate March, and that work that we did together really showed the possibilities. There was a lot of collaboration and alignment with us, and for that reason, and seeing the aftermath of, you know, Hurricane Sandy really allowed for us to just shift and start like building more alliances across groups that in some point might not have worked together. And so that's what we got engaged, and that's what we became one of the key members of the coalition.
Amazing. And I love, kind of the power of, which is hard to even think about now with COVID, but that power of coming together physically and to feel each other's energy and to come together around a cause. And this is some of, you know, what things like New York Climate Week and these kind of anchoring times that we can kind of collect ourselves and see what's possible. And of course, you know, these events like Hurricane Sandy, bring us together in different ways. Love to hear from you, Elizabeth. Tell us kind of your thoughts on that, the power of the collective and how you see this work moving.
Sure, Ashe, so happy to be here with all of you. So how we got into New York Renews, you know, Sunset Park, where UPROSE is located, our organization has been in existence since 1966, and for a long time, really fighting a legacy of environmental burdens and abuses and envisioning what renewable energy, what moving away from extraction, what a just transition would look like. And it's a community, one of many communities in New York where, you know, we've got a state that is the center of commerce, the center of capital, the place where all the bad decisions are made that influence extraction. And so New York State had to lead. And so the opportunity to be part of a statewide coalition that would put us on course, that would put a spotlight on our communities, on frontline communities all over the state, and drive resources so that we could manifest the vision that our communities have of making it real and operationalizing what these solutions could look like, and move us out of harm's way, was really exciting. And so it has been a really powerful coming together across the entire state. And we have been able as a state to strengthen what we call social cohesion, relationships with each other, so that we could not only talk about what does a policy look like, what are the resources, how do we operationalize it, but how do we look like as a people so that we're ready for this future that's already here.
Beautiful. Rahwa, tell us a little bit about Buffalo, Push Buffalo, and kind of, yeah, these movement formations that you've been participating in and leading within.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I just want to really echo everything that my colleagues, Maritza and Elizabeth, have already said. And for us, it's about putting people first, and that we have to center the people and the planet. And we really want to show up in solidarity, not just thinking about our own backyards, but thinking about all of our community members that are in harm's way. And so the origin story of New York Renews is actually pretty powerful. Mm-hmm. It was right after Superstorm Sandy, and then the People's Climate March, which was the largest climate march globally at that time. And so we took a bus and a half load of frontline people that was intergenerational, that, you know, folks that look like me, to stand in solidarity so that that never happened, and that we get to the solutions as quickly as possible. And what was really beautiful about that is we actually marched with the people that had the solutions. And I think if you remember any picture from that movement, you will see UPROSE and their beautiful flowers, just like from the sky, I'm sure. And so we marched right alongside them. And then there was this amazing sort of vibration that went through our entire state, I think throughout the world, but certainly in our state. And some folks didn't want to let that down. So Eddie Bautista, Matt Ryan, I think Peter Iwanowitz, possibly Mark Weiss, went on a road show. And so we were invited to a road show. That's the first time I met Eddie. And he afterwards said to me, he's like, "Hey sis, how you doing?" But what's beautiful about it is because we said, listen, we need to center equity. We need more people that look like us. We need young people to get involved. So if that's what you're about, then we're with you. Otherwise, we're going back home because this is what we do. And so that's how New York Renews was formed. And from the first meeting of everybody coming together, it was 20 organizations. We very quickly got to the HEMES principles that Elizabeth introduced. We very quickly got to making sure that we had an equity framework and created our points of unity. And I think that is why we have such a solid foundation, and we're able to pass the most comprehensive and equitable climate legislation in the country in just 3 years.
I haven't not heard that origin story, and I know of the pieces that were happening, but didn't quite understand the power of that continuity. And as Elizabeth put in, the September 21st, 2014 People's Climate March births New York Renews and much more. Thank you so much for sharing that. It's, yeah, incredibly powerful, and I'm really excited that we were able to share that here. And so, yeah, so Kate, tell us, you're here bringing a perspective from the private sector, one that's important and really important for us as part of this collective formation to move forward. And I'd love to hear kind of your perspective on this question.
Yeah, I was laughing as I came off mute just because I have this energy of like, what am I doing on this panel with these incredible women that like I want to be?
I feel the same way.
I got my notebook out, so I'm like attending a master class. But yeah, I mean, I think for Seventh Generation, like we come into, I'm really lucky to get to lead advocacy work at Seventh Generation, and the way that we come into that is really saying it's super important to us that we're taking accountability for the impact that we have on people on the planet. And when we stepped back and looked at what does that mean, like what is our impact on the climate, the first thing that immediately stands out is over 90% of the emissions that are associated with Seventh Generation's products comes when consumers use our products to wash and dry their dishes and wash and dry their laundry. So we have a super robust sustainability plan, and it's work that we're constantly, it's a place of constant improvement. And we acknowledge that at some point, like the change that we make there is a rounding error compared to the impact that comes from consumers actually using our products, right? Like the process of making them and distributing them is peanuts compared to folks using a dirty energy system when they're using our products. So understanding that we have to use our influence and our resources to step beyond sustainability into a place where we're advocating for just and systemic climate policy solutions. And, you know, we had the opportunity really to work with New York Renews because of our relationship with the Solutions Project, and, you know, work that we had done through our foundation. And I think it's really fair to say that as we were sort of looking at, you know, where are the state level policies that are going to have a huge impact? Of course, New York, and of course, the Climate and Community Protection Act stood out, as folks have already said. Like, New York is a leader in so many ways, and so knowing that the impact of passing a policy like that in New York would have such huge ripple effects. And Solutions Project, honestly, I think, to be very blunt, it was an opportunity for them to sort of vouch for us and build a bridge. The business community has done, and I think continues to do, some very real harm. And this work, climate justice work, is necessarily deeply relational. So having that bridge was a really important enabler. And, you know, we've tried to continually build on that to earn that trust and to move into a deeper relationship over time. But all of that is through following the leadership and the strategic analysis of New York Renews, and coming to the table, aspiring always to come to the table with a real commitment of our time and resources in service of that leadership. So, you know, what became possible for us through that relationship was having such a strong strategy, a willingness to collaborate and have us in the mix and show up in a way that was supportive of the work. I think, you know, Seventh Generation would never have been able to do on our own what we were able to do in support of and in solidarity with New York Renews.
Beautiful. I'm realizing I'm really happy this is recorded. There's just so much here that I think I'm going to be actually reviewing this again. So much to capture, but you know, comments, you know, from a leader like yourself, Kate, around earning trust, around following the leadership of New York Renews, around corporate accountability. Those are really powerful statements, and just gratitude for you for stepping up in those ways. Okay, let's move on to another question. So this one, we're going to have Maritza and Rahwa on this question, which is really getting into New York politics. So New York politics, like many places in our country, is changing fast. What does this mean for climate justice solutions? And where do you hope that Governor Hochul will stake her legacy?
It's really a great question, Sakita, because I think, as folks might know, we have a very new governor right now, right? And it's a woman for the first time. After, you know, seeing how Governor Cuomo, you know, it was really hard to get him to respond to the needs of our communities, specifically from New York Renews. It took us 6 years to be able to pass the CLCPA law, right? So the hope here is that Governor Hochul would actually listen to the demands of the people who are at the front lines, that Governor Hochul will shift the approach to the implementation of CLCPA, listening to what we need to be changing in the state, right? Like right now, there's a lot of corporate polluters who are lobbying and actively trying to undermine the implementation of CLCPA with false solutions. We know that that's happening. We, many of us in this call, actually, I think Rahwa and Elizabeth joined the working groups that are part of the implementation of the CLCPA, and we are seeing how much, you know, it can be done if they actually listen to the people in our communities. So we're going to be looking very closely how she will be moving the implementation of the CLCPA. But not only that, but also she needs to ensure that we have enough funding to be able to implement this law. When we talk about renewable energy, we know that that's costly, and we have to make sure that the government invests in this kind of new economy. If we allow for private sector to take over only, we're going to have to be tied up to them. So we want to see a shift in the approach of the work. How do we actually create a new economy where we create good union jobs? How do we ensure that folks in the communities that have not been able to access those jobs enter into apprenticeship programs? So that can only happen if the implementation of CLCPA is connected to the CCIA, which is a law that we will talk about a little bit later, but the Climate Community Investment Act is a law that we are invested in as a coalition, and we expect Governor Hochul to pass next year.
That's what's up. That's a very direct, very clear. The ask is on the table. It's clear for those in the administration listening. Rahwa, go ahead.
Yeah, Everything that Maritza said is exactly what we need Kathy Hochul to do as our new governor. And what I'm really excited about is that, you know, Kathy Hochul is from Western New York. She's actually from Buffalo. So I have to shout her out on that. Yes, my hometown. She's a very good listener and past, you know, past experiences. She's a mom. She really understands how, you know, politics and being in elected office works. But I also hope, and from what I've heard a little bit of her being, you know, kind of front and center these last few weeks, is that there is a willingness to listen. But there also needs to be a commitment to meeting with frontline leadership. Yes, we talk to the state agencies. Yes, we're part of the Climate Justice Working Group, but it is imperative that she sit down and actually hear it from us, because we should be speaking in our own voices. And I know she can understand that. And we don't need anybody else to speak for us, as you can tell by today's presentation. So I think there is that. I think exactly what Maritza said that I really just want to lift up is that she understands that the climate catastrophe is very real. It's an imminent situation, and it's a priority. And I've heard of a couple of the false solutions that we put out, which is, again, even more critical for her to meet with New York Renews, the New York Renews leadership, and EJ leaders in their respective communities. And I also just want to say I am very grateful for the press release that came out yesterday, where they've expanded funding and expanded air quality monitoring in general across the state, but that they're going to be working with community-based organizations and funding them, but also bringing the monitoring to the neighborhood level. So we're going to hold her to that. And we are grateful for the opportunity to do that.
That's awesome. And I don't know Kathy Hochul, but I think hopefully she feels grateful for you all, because to have that type of presence outside the government is incredibly powerful. And so just excited to hear about that. So for the next question, let's go in a little bit deeper to these policies, right? So we've heard about the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, the CLCPA, as well as the Climate and Community Investment Act, the CCIA. I'm going to turn now to both Elizabeth and Maritza to understand a little bit more what's innovative in those policies that you want to share with us. And do you see anything, some possible challenges in the implementations, particularly of the CLCPA, which is already on the books? And Maritza, you referenced polluter corporations undermining the implementation. So I think you've already named something there, but anything that you want to add in that vein? And I'm making this a very complicated question, but throwing out the Justice 40 initiative, if there's anything from those policies that you feel are particularly relevant as that federal policy begins to look at their own implementation.
That's a big question, Sakita. It's a lot there. You know, this is a great opportunity that we have, but there are some inconsistencies and there are some problems, right? I think a lot of people think of Justice 40 as a panacea, and it's just one piece of a big toolbox that we need to address these problems. And there's a lot of focus on moving the money to the front line without a conversation about how, at the same time as moving the money, there is also an investment, a deep investment in false solutions and techno fixes. And so you're basically giving with one hand and taking away with the other. The other problem is that the 40 really should not be the ceiling, it should be the basement, and that different communities have different needs. The other is accessibility. How do we make sure that the communities most in need, frontline, Black, Indigenous, and people of color led communities, are accessing those resources and getting the support that they need to operationalize a local vision, since we know that doesn't always happen. And then I think that it's just also really important that we not just focus on renewable energy, that when people think about solutions, they always think energy, when we know that water will be affected, food will be affected, that climate change is going to disrupt a number of systems. And so a food sovereignty initiative is just as necessary and powerful as a renewable energy and community ownership and wealth initiative. And so we need to be able to think beyond the sort of the conventional thinking about how you address climate change, and really sort of start with what very hyper local needs are and how those resources are used to change that on the ground. So I'm going to stop there because I know Maritza can talk about some of the tensions that we have at the state level, but at the national level, I think it would have been good if they had consulted with frontline leaders so that they could have, instead of copying something, could have enhanced and addressed some critical concerns that remained with us.
Beautiful. Maritza.
I cannot agree more with Elizabeth. I think, we have to go to the source always of like who is affected by those issues, and they have the solutions. And we have to remember that whenever we talk about this, right? Like it's really important. In terms of the CLCPA and the CCIA, from the context of policy, I can say that, through these policies, we were able to actually work it through from the ground up, right? Like it was no academic who came into our coalition meeting and said, this is how we're going to do it, right? This was a policy that was developed from the ground up. And I think that's innovative in the context of so much greenwashing that we have been exposed for so many years, right? So I want to just lift that up because it's important to recognize that the CLCPA was a vision of law from this community in this coalition, right? And this is what we did together, and that's how we won it. In the context of pieces that I like to talk about CLCPA that I think is important is that from the beginning, we always wanted to make sure that we touch on climate change and how do we actually affect communities in the front lines, ensuring that investment goes into that communities, 35% to be the minimum of investments, right? As Elizabeth said, having to be sort of like the starting point, not the end, right? But similarly, thinking through a just transition. As we close up power plants, as we move away from the fossil fuel industry, we have to make sure that workers are transitioning into good jobs, right? In renewable energy jobs. And this policy that we develop actually gets to that and allows for our coalition to continue to talk about the intersection of these issues. We are complex humans. We have to think about the complexities that we carry on in our policies as well. We are not one single issue, right, type of people. So we have to think a bit bigger. So that's what we did with CLCPA. I want to also mention CCIA. When we thought about this policy, we also thought about the importance of investment and the importance of calling out the people who have polluted our communities, that have made it so people have gotten sick in communities of color, particularly, right? Black and brown and indigenous communities have been affected for many years, right? So the polluters who have polluted our planet have to be the ones held accountable, and they have to pay for the cost of their pollution. So that's what CCIA does, the Climate Community Investment Act, that's it, right? They would have to actually clean up their mess. It's as simple as that. And that's innovative because we want to make sure that as those corporations are talking about being green, because some of them are talking about that, we also hold them to their word by ensuring that they pay for the solutions that need to be put in place. And lastly, I want to say that aside from the policies, none of this work can ever happen if we don't actually have the power of the people and this coalition that work together. And sometimes it's hard to have conversations. We might not agree at once, right? Like we have to debate it. And this coalition has continually, very consistently working together to ensure that we pass these policies, but also build power across the state to ensure that implementation moves forward the vision that we have put together. So I will say that's the innovative part of all of this, because it's not just about the policy, it's about the power that we're building together.
Incredible. This really is a masterclass. And, you know, when I hear sometimes when folks are like, oh, we can't do it all. We have to only deal with carbon emissions, or we have to only deal with conservation, or we can, and what we're hearing is from experts who have, through deep process of working with community and working with, you know, multi-stakeholder formations, have actually come up with laws and policies that are intersectional and can hold the complexity of the space, the complexity that of the issue of climate change and environmental injustice and all of these things must be matched with the complexity of community vision, which is the only thing that really can match this with the right solution. So incredibly motivated hearing you all speak. And Maritza, I think your remarks kind of lead us into our next question for Kate, you know, around the role of corporations. And Kate, if you can talk a little bit about, we've just heard a lot about the policy work, the advocacy work, the activism that can help move within the public sector, policies that are more in line with frontline vision. How do you do something like that in the corporate sector? So how do you make the case in your company to align with frontline leadership on these issues?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're fortunate, and I'm fortunate in leading this work, that I think, as I said before, just the very way that we come into it is understanding that sustainability really has to be table stakes at this point. And I think that's the underlying message that I would have for other companies that are thinking about the role that they have to play and what that looks like. If you're serious in any way about the climate crisis, and certainly about climate justice, then you have to use the outsized influence, frankly, that business already has over policymaking in this country to advocate for systemic change. We need more companies who are taking that step from sustainability to advocacy. And I think there's also a really critical question around, who are you going to choose to be in community with? Because you can approach climate work from a place of what you think is politically feasible. You can approach it from a place of what's the fastest way to drive down emissions, or you can approach it from a place of how do we go about dismantling the systems that have brought us to this inflection point, and what do we want to build? Because I think that the answer to that question drives the type of work you can do and will do. It drives who you can and should work with to that end. And New York Renews, the organizations that are represented on this panel, the organizations that make up New York Renews, are already deeply engaged in the work of building that future that works for everyone. They have the expertise, they have the policy solutions. That's the work that Seventh Generation wants to be a part of. That's the work that I hope more and more members of the business community want to be a part of, and start with building that trust and building those relationships to enable that work.
Beautiful. And I think it's so important, Kate, for you to be up here talking about this, because I think sometimes folks outside the work think, I don't know, that the company's gonna implode if you do this work or something, but like, you're here and your brand is doing well. I just, not TMI, but took a shower with your product. So like we're all here, we're doing well. And it's because we're having the courage to choose a more sustainable and humane and just path forward. And it's, I think, collectively kind of, better for everyone. So thank you for being here to share that. And I just want to just note the all-female panel. I just want to call that out. This is not by accident. There is a critical nature of female voices, feminine energy, of intuitive nature, of collaborative, collective healing that we all bring to this space. And so I just wanted to note that as I was hearing everyone speaking, to bring that forward through this conversation. And we have, I think this is our last question before we head over to Q&A. And this is for everyone. I'm sorry, we have two more questions. I missed one. So the next question is actually for Rahwa and Elizabeth. What did it mean to have not only big businesses like Seventh Generation, but also small businesses stand with frontline leaders in New York?
That is such a great question. And also, Kate, thank you for everything you said. So how do we think, why small businesses too that have supported us? I think the businesses that are dealing with the realities of where we are globally is that the climate crisis is not going away. And for us, I think it's really important that we have bold solutions, because we understand that it's about everyone. It's about every single living being on this planet. And I can tell you that why trust EJ and frontline leadership, because all of the reports, all of the solutions, they already exist, they're out there, but it's about the right formations and how you put these things together to ensure that there's going to be success. And so center the people that have already worked holistically and understand what the community issues are around root cause issues. We can call it intersectionality, we can call it social determinants of health. It's all of the same outcomes. We already have all of that data. So how are we building systems that are generative, circular, collaborate, and cooperate with each other, right? And that's across every level, from the human level to nature, to tech, to all of that, right? It has to be a scaffolding approach of how it all works together. That's what we call those formations and why it's critical. And some of us can see the answers to that fairly quickly because it's what we do. And so, for example, this bill, why this bill, CLCPA, it's economy-wide. So everybody has to get it together. Number two, the CCIA. We're thinking about climate, jobs, and infrastructure funds, right? We have to create new transportation systems. We have to, get a whole new workforce that can build these things, maintain these things, own these things, yada, yada, yada. And so the reality of that is we don't have very much time and that window is closing. So we have the solutions. Let's drive all the resources to the places that we don't want to be left behind. And then everybody would be lifted up and we will all transition together. And that is what we call a just transition. Another thing, community just transition fund, the workers. We're thinking about a worker community owned assurance fund. We're thinking about a New York Energy rebate fund, not just for low income and mid income earners of residents of Western New York, but also small businesses and some of those businesses that also have to transition along with us. So you brought up this issue of we're all like these powerful women here, right? And that's not an accident. And I think part of that is we understand generative circular economies, and that is what we're trying to build.
So powerful, and love the alliteration that you had in there.
So I have to follow that mic drop.
Yeah, Elizabeth, what? Go for it.
Like, what am I supposed to add to that? She just like did that.
You just did that. Yes.
Badassery in motion, right? I guess the only thing that I would ask businesses is what is a business model? What does an economic development model look like in the face of climate change? How do you sustain businesses so that they can thrive given the disruption that is here and is heading our way? How do you treat workers in a way that honors them and that makes them part of the decision-making of that body? Because our people want to work somewhere. One of the stereotypes is that the environmental justice movement is anti-business, and that's not true. Our people have to work somewhere. We don't have the luxury of not having that choice, but we want to work in places that aren't killing us, right? The other is supply chain. How do you make sure that your supply chain, that your outcomes, that your products are carbon neutral? And how do you make sure that they're not causing harm and hurting the demographic that is growing and getting bigger, that actually buys your product, that is actually making it possible for your business to grow? And then in terms of small businesses, they are, always called the backbone of every community. We're talking about mom and pop shops that sometimes don't have the resources. The immigrant community, the Black and Indigenous community is really innovative and creative, and how they get their start and their entry into the middle class is through small businesses, right? But they don't have the resources to engage in climate adaptation and mitigation and ensure that they can survive the disruption that happens like what we saw with COVID. And so we need to make sure that we support them and that we invest in them because those are the places that support us when the lights are out in every other part of the economy. So I would just add those few pieces to everything that Rawa said. It is complex, it is multidimensional, and it is the only way that we can think about how to address climate change, because climate change is not distinguishing between one sector or the other. It's coming at us from every direction.
Yes, powerful. So we have just a couple more minutes. So just turning to Kate and Maritza on a similar question, but really if you can tell us what advice or ask do you have for the private sector? So this is companies and funders making climate commitments and kind of wanting to step up into this space, and even some of them making racial justice commitments, but aren't yet joining forces with frontline leaders advocating for bold climate justice policies. What advice do you have or ask do you have? And we can start with Kate.
Yeah, I think I touched on this previously. I think that for me, the biggest question is, what do you stand for and who do you want to stand with? And I'll go back just for a second to something, Sakita, that you said of like, that it's sort of great to sort of be here and show up in this space. And also, that there's something sort of brave or, in taking that stance, knowing that like, that's not necessarily what we expect of the business community. This is not something that I talk about a lot, and I want to like triple underline, like, do not, if you are a business, do not get into this work because you think that it's going to make people like your brand more. That being said, we have seen that when people know that about seventh generation social mission, they think that our products work better and they think that they smell better, which is very funny to me. But it goes to show that like people, this is not only can you not have a successful business on a sick planet, full stop, right? There is no future for business in a world of runaway climate change, but also, you know, this is not, I think that business can be so short-sighted in that risk aversion. And I think there's a very real reality here that the world is changing and people expect more of every aspect of society to not just have a business case for this, but to also have a moral case for why we need to advocate and be loud for climate justice. And again, to be intentional and think about which community and which approach you're going to take with that. So, you know, I think the advice that I would say is like, sustainability is no longer enough. What are you advocating for? What is the systemic policy change that you want to see? And then who are you standing with in that work? And I promise it's not as scary as that seems. And like, people might think your products smell better.
You heard it here first, y'all. Support the climate justice movement and you will smell better. This is key. That's powerful. Thank you, Kate. Maritza, bring us home with your thoughts.
Thanks for that, Kate. I want to actually focus my response to the renewable energy companies. I want to focus on the companies that are actually right now profiting out of creating renewable energy, right? I think it's important for them to think about the renewal of our economy. We have to shift this race to the bottom approach. We want our workers, as Elizabeth mentioned before, to be protected. We want our workers to be getting living wages, right? We have to shift the economy. And this is the moment. We don't have a lot of time to waste. This is the existential crisis that the entire globe is facing right now, right? So I think there is an incredible moment right now to address the existential crisis by ensuring that we fix the things that have been wrong. We have to ensure that our workers are protected. So that's for the renewable energy economy. Let's do it right. Let's do it with the frontline communities. Let's make sure that we shift the approach in terms of how much we invest in neighborhoods that have been already affected by pollution and health issues. And lastly, for the funders who might be joining us here today, I do want to say that number one, continue supporting groups from the front lines. Continue ensuring that the organizing happens, because this work and this job isn't easy. We are up against huge corporations that continue to lobby against the idea of shifting our economy. So I will say, let's move together. I love the thing that sometimes, Elizabeth, I'm gonna quote you for a moment. Let's find that bigger we that we can have, right? And let's make it happen. Because when we work together, we can actually have a better quality of life, not only for ourselves, but also for our kids and the future to come.
Yes, I love it. Just absolutely perfect. Thank you all so much. This was a gift. You know, you all brought your experiences, your love, your heart into kind of helping us to deepen our understanding of this work, and to do it in a way that it's super accessible. There's so many things that y'all said that anybody that's listening can interact with and support the work that's happening and even help to shape the work that's happening. So thank you so much. And finding the bigger we, I love this. We actually can move into our first question that gets into that a little bit, and asking if the panelists can talk a little bit about the range of organizations and even companies that are in the coalition. And well, actually, this might be specifically about New York Renews, but the range of organizations in the coalition and on the steering committee.
Okay, I guess everybody's real quiet. I was waiting for you, Rawa.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
no. Go ahead, please.
No, I was just going to say everybody who is about transformation and making a difference is part of New York Renews. I think it's close to, if it isn't already, 300 organizations throughout the state, throughout New York City, the state of New York. New York City can be really, really inappropriate by saying there's New York City and everything else is upstate. But Long Island is represented, Indigenous people are represented, Black, Indigenous people of color, women-led organizations, businesses are represented. It is really a broad base of coalition with a lot of people who might not have known each other or broken bread together or even had a conversation, because we're coming from such very different places, right? Most of us that come from the front line are anchored in racial justice. And so really bringing together very different people to the table to build consensus and to move New York State on a path to addressing climate justice. But I'm certain that I've left out a lot, so happy to hear from Rawa and Maritza.
You left our labor unions. our good friends sometimes, might be hard, but they can be in our side. That we have some labor unions as well in our coalition.
There are some good ones.
Yes. And I'm sure y'all have a website where there's probably more information on kind of the nature of the formation that folks can dive into. Okay, Rahwa, did you have anything you wanted to add, or should I go to the next question? No? Okay, right on. So, and thank you to Sarah, shout out to Sarah Shanley Hope for organizing this and keeping us on time. Y'all didn't even know what's happening in the background to make sure that we're not going over time, and very lovingly, and also providing lots of insights on the chat itself and links. So you all should be hopefully keeping track of what she's putting into the chat. Okay, so what's next for New York Renews, and how can folks outside, I guess, how can we support the continued climate justice policy innovation in New York? And that's for anyone who wants to answer that.
I'm happy to answer part of it. I think what's next for New York Renews is, from the beginning of the legislation, we kind of went into it with the thought of, if we are not prepared to govern, we are not prepared to win. So we ensured that community-based members and members of New York Renews would be at every level of the Climate Action Council, the working groups, and advisory panels. And so we will continue to work on implementation and making sure that the entire legislation is implemented correctly. And then I think similarly, we're also still trying to pass the Climate and Community Investment Act, because we have the 35% minimum of investments going to frontline communities. Well, how are we going to pay for that? The transition is not going to be very cheap, because we have to move very quickly. And so our solution to that is the Climate and Community Investment Act, asking the people that got us here in the first place, the biggest polluters, to help us transition into a different energy system. So that is going to be what's next. And what can funders do? Please fund New York Renews. One of the biggest things that we are doing is we're not just trying to grow the coalition, we're trying to add capacity to the coalition in ways that follow the same types of practices that we have about ensuring that we are not extracting from people's labor, that we are not extracting from our communities, that we are adding capacity and the technical assistance capacity over time to make sure that they are, have the ability to transition right along with us and not get left behind.
Beautiful. Any quick additions, and we have or I can move into other questions. Okay, so our next question takes us into the topic of false solutions. So we have a participant who I'd like to read what she said, so I can, her voice can be in this space. I'm part of a group which has been opposing bringing hydroelectric to New York City from Hydro-Quebec. We oppose it because it has violated the people of Canada's First Nation and taken their land against their wills. Dams and mega dams do not provide clean and renewable energy. This is truly damaging to the Hudson River, which has been damaged for well over a century. But just this week, our new governor has approved this project. What do we do about this? to help to change her mind. And I think if you all would like to get into that specifically, I don't know about enough about the politics to speak on that, but specifically and generally, this notion that as folks are getting more active in the climate solution space, how do we, and we were talking about this before this went live, actually, Rahul, I think you were kind of mentioning, how do we really activate around preventing some of these false solutions from being invested in and being supported by policy?
If I may, I can tell you that as a co-chair of the Climate Justice Alliance, that we have material on the website, and I know New York Renews does as well, that provides people with a framework and a guideline on how we fight false solutions. There is an enormous amount of resources being invested, both by philanthropy and government, to literally operationalize plans that turn our communities into sacrifice zones. In the issue of Hydro-Quebec, we have met, UPROSE has met with the Canadian government, and we have also testified against Hydro-Quebec. We have told them that we will follow the leadership of the Indigenous Environmental Network, and we've given them all of the reasons why we stand in solidarity with our Indigenous folks. We've also spoken to the mayor's office in the city of New York that was really aggressive, I believe last year, in trying to push Hydro-Quebec. And I think that any organization or any group that is either an ally with the climate justice movement or in the climate justice movement has to do the same thing. And if they don't know and they don't have the information and they don't understand the analysis, that information is available through the Climate Justice Alliance, and New York Renews has also a toolbox that can be really useful.
Beautiful. Any other thoughts on that? Thank you for laying that out.
I mean, I think the panel is also, or the person who was asking the question was asking what to do as well. I mean, I echo what Elizabeth said. Here in New York City, we also have a coalition, the Climate Works for All coalition, which, you know, together met with Hydro-Quebec folks, and similarly, you know, it was made very clear the opposition of folks in our city. It's looking like none of the efforts have actually made it so that the current governor has changed her mind or has actually really reached out to figure out a path forward. But if there's anything that folks can do is send a note, send an email, writing through the letters to the editor, make your voice be heard. I think it's important for the majority of people. You don't have to be part of a specific coalition to just speak up your mind. Like, I think the more loud we are together, the more we'll be able to see. So I would say for the person who asked that question to make sure that you, one, join the efforts of these coalitions, two, send out any materials to the governor, letting her know why this is so detrimental to our communities, as Elizabeth explained, as well as you have already noted on your question. And thank you for your work.
Wonderful. Great. So the next question is a little bit about, I think, well, it's for the Solutions Project, but how do you decide what to fund and what are the risks or rewards in being one of the first funders for strategies or coalitions like New York Renews, and maybe even expanding that kind of for the private sector? How do you, how do you align? How do you be truly in solidarity and in partnership with this work? And so I think, you know, I'll say briefly, and then Kate, I don't know if you've touched on this a little bit, but if there's anything else you want to add. But certainly, I think we have kind of the wrong language and kind of framing about what is risky and what it's not. I think it's risky not to support frontline leaders in this space. It's really risky and poor business and investment choices not to be putting unrestricted dollars into the vision and the incredible work of communities and leaders who are often closest to the issues, and often what we haven't also understood, I think, collectively for philanthropy, are also closest to the solutions. So, you know, I want to get this right. I want us to move forward for future generations in ways that where humanity can be can be sustainable and, you know, live with compassion for each other and really get in a right relationship with each other and with our Mother Earth. And so in doing that, you want to put your dollars where it makes sense. And I'm also under the complete reparations framework. This isn't our money. And this money is from, you know, generations of oppression. And so as we think about how we shift money, it's really about giving up and ensuring that the folks who have been most oppressed by the sources of that money are, you know, have roles in deciding where that goes, and have unrestricted access to it. I don't know, Kate, if you wanted to add anything kind of from the corporate giving space that you've talked a little bit about it. So no pressure, but if there's anything else you wanted to add.
I mean, I think you nailed it with that response, and I'll share, you know, I think, you know, the Seventh Generation Foundation works with organizations like the Solutions Project for exactly those reasons. I mean, I think that you all have shown a huge amount of leadership in this space, and it provides a real guiding framework for all foundations, certainly for corporate foundations. And then I think beyond that, there's just something for me that really comes from a place of, you know, what does it mean when you think about what it means to build equitable relationships? You know, part of that is thinking about what resources do you have and where can those resources be doing the most good. So, I mean, what you're saying about, you know, reparations, and I think, you know, just straight up redistributing funds to where they need to be and where they can do, you know, have the greatest impact, and be, you know, leveraged by the folks who have the greatest expertise, the greatest experience, and are closest to these issues. I think that's exactly right.
Thank you. Thank you. We were just about at time, but maybe some final remarks from the rest of the panelists, Elizabeth, Maritza, Rahwa.
Yeah, I'm happy to start, and I would love for my colleagues to also get some final words in. I think that what the Solutions Project has done is that it is demonstrating, modeling the practice of everything that we are talking about. They are in right relationship with the frontline leaders. They have the trust of the frontline leaders. They're able to be dynamic. But then they also have the ear, they're funders, right? They come from philanthropy. There's a whole dynamic there. And so we are sending a signal, even just how, for example, the intention of how this entire panel was put together, right? We are representing business, we are multiracial, we are representing different, you know, demographics, and yet we have these very holistic ways. And everything that we've done, I hope, is we're modeling it so that more people can come along with us. And if people are really, truly committed to addressing all these equity issues that exist and where our planet is, and we want to heal, then we have to heal together. And so how do we come into right relationship, and how do we come into practice with each other? And please, yes, follow the Solutions Project's lead, because they're doing remarkable things.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I'm a little biased because I serve on the board of trustees of the Solutions Project, but I can say honestly that the ability to be really strategic, having messy conversations, working to level the playing field, ensuring that we are not that philanthropy doesn't mirror capitalism and colonialism and extraction and patriarchy, that philanthropy is really aligned with the front line in centering racial justice and equity, and that those traditional models of giving change, Solutions has certainly been playing a leading role in making that happen, and a necessary role, because when it started, we knew climate change was going to be a serious problem and that we had to build alignment, but we had to create the vehicle for making that happen. And so it's not, you know, philanthropy comes from a different place, right? We know the history of it, but here comes Solutions Project with a different vision, really incorporating the thinking, the critical thinking, and the solutions that are being led by the front lines, the people that are most impacted. And so, I, you know, obviously I love the Solutions Project. Also the ability to sort of check and check in and play that game, that role of, because we don't have the answers, right? We are unlearning a lot of what we've learned. That kind of humility that we need right now in the face of climate change, that is embodied by the staff, which is so amazing, and the vision that is led by the Solutions Project. So, so yeah, I think it's an absolutely important an initiative, and that it should be supported and followed and lifted. Yeah.
I promise y'all, we did not prep folks to say all these things. Thank you so much for those kind words. Maritza, excuse me, to you for final words for our panel.
Thank you. I'll be super brief because I think my co-panelists are incredible and they said it all. But one thing that I want to elevate about Solutions Project and the work that we're doing together is that we have been able to just, I mean, you all Solutions Project have been able to just be the connective tissue for us. And that is something to elevate. At Align, we try and we do our best possible to just connect folks to be able to work across different sectors and different organizations. And that is a hard piece of work. So I know that it's really difficult to just get into alignment sometimes, but I think, as Elizabeth mentioned, just having those difficult conversations and courageous conversations can allow for real transformational change in our world, in our society, in our cities and our states. And I think that comes from what I said earlier, the work of love with authentic leadership. And you all embody that. My co-panelists embody that. And I want to thank you all for being here today. And thanks for the extra minute.
That's it. Beautiful. Thank you so much. Well, yeah, just powerful remarks. Please, you've heard about New York Renew, CCLP, CCIA, all the work that's happening. Support, be engaged. We have contact information slide up there for folks to be able to reach out. And everyone, please stay safe and have a beautiful day.
Peace.
Yay.